There is a park just outside of Richmond called Bell's Isle. People go kayaking, fishing, and hiking. There is an area of Bells simply called the Rocks where a lot more illegal things happen. A lot of smoking, drinking, skinny dipping, fucking, and all that fun shit. I, of course, was always there. There's just something about the Rocks that just simply pristine and beautiful. About a mile down from the entrance to the Rocks, there's a little tiny cove where a massive and decrepit pump house from the early 1966, abandoned. I've seen a fuck ton of people jump off the third story into the water below, almost like a diving board. Now, like I said, this facility was a big, and I mean it was a big, it stretched out about 50 feet and stood maybe 150 feet tall. There was maybe 5 floors total. There wasn't anything entirely fascinating about the place, to be honest, but it was just a massive concrete husk with old piping and scaffolding. The park closes at dusk, just like most parks in the area. But that didn't stop anybody from getting out there, starting a fire at the rocky outcroppings and getting wasted for far, far into the late in the night. I, of course, did so as well. It was maybe midnight before I decided that a 12-pack of Pabst Blue Ribbon, she's disgusting, 3 or 4 joints in my s'mores, it was time to roll out. Packing up my small backpack, I went ahead and started out towards my truck. After rock hopping for about a quarter mile upstream, I passed by the old pump house. I recall there was a pathway behind the pump house that gets me a lot quicker to the parking lot. So, in the dead of night, armed with nothing but a flashlight in my little 32 coat, I started making my way down the path. Walking along the trail, it borders a brick wall of the pump house. I noticed a door I had never seen before, a massive and heavy-looking steel door. My curiosity piqued. I decided to test the door. Sure as shit, the door moved. It swung open with a loud, groaning, scraping sound. I shined the flashlight down the hall, a set of stairs that leads down presumably to the control room. I pull my revolver out slowly, holding it tightly onto the walnut grip as I creep down the bowels of the pump house. Making it down to the basement of the stairwell, I noticed a few things right off the bat. Number 1, it was indeed the control room, with old, grimy, dirty panels. Number 2, the smell hit me hard, like sickeningly hard. It reeked of mold, mildew, and blood. Number 3, the sketchy-looking pentagram that sat in the center of the fucking room. Yeah, you heard me, a pentagram, drawn out in shock, with some incredibly sketchy, questionable stains on the floor. Number 4, the candles that were burning around the circle. Okay, creep factor just fucking skyrocketed. I looked around the panel, surveying it. My heart leapt out of my throat when I heard footsteps and talking coming down the staircase. Panicked, my eyes looked around until I found a locker that was big enough to get into. I quickly got in and very quietly shut the door and stayed as silent as the grave. I watched through the grapes of the darker door, feeling like I was a cheesy person in a horror movie. 6 robed in hooded men came down into the panel room and gathered around the circle. One man carried a panting dog in his arms and then slowly chanted what I can only assume was possibly words of Latin, while the man who held the dog set him down, then produced a knife. I watched in pure horror as the knife was plunged into the poor dog. It whined and struggled until it died. The chanting grew louder and intensified. The room grew deathly cold and the candles around the room went out. It was stupid, fucking cold, even though it had been dead in the fucking middle of summer. I held my breath and stayed as still as humanly possible. After I went to say 20 minutes or so, the men began to leave. I sighed with relief. I jumped out of my fucking skin when my flashlight bangs aloud and clear against the locker door. God, motherfucking damn it. I jumped out of the door and I watched in pure horror as the 2 men came back down the stairs. So what now? Fuck this shit. I kicked the door open, office roughly hinges, revolver in hand, using my 6'8", 320-pound body to belt out the loudest "Get the fuck back, you fuckers." I held the revolver up, aimed at the closest man near me, and I clearly towered over the 2 men, and I was watched as the other 4 rogue men come down barreling over the stairwell. I was trembling, holding a revolver at the small crowd in front of me. "How long were you here?" the first man asked me. "Long enough, friend," I answered, Fair enough. Leave, and speak to no one of this, he replied. Deal, I said. Each one moved aside from the entrance, and I made my way at the stairs, my back facing away from them. Revolver still ain't down the stairwell. And as soon as I made it out the door, I ran like my fat ass depended on it. Made the 20-minute hike in 5 minutes, hopped into my truck, and hauled ass all the way home. I went back to Bell's about a month later and was relaxing on the rock near the pump house when a young man, probably in his 20s, sat down next to me. He lit up a smoke and spoke to me. Tell me, friend, do you believe in God? He spoke. I took my sunglasses off and looked over to him, tapping out the ashes of my cigarette. It all depends. My heart skipped over a couple of times when I recognized the face of the young man. Take a guess who it was. He smiled at me. I swallowed. Who knows? He got up instead of his hand. I recommend you stay away from that house from now on. Okay, I shook his hand. Sure, friend, sure. I haven't seen the young man since. This happened just a few days ago, and it terrifies me so much that I still look over my shoulder when I'm in a room by myself. So I work with the construction and the part of the office that is, I have a team of guys and a girl who happens to be a really good friend of mine. We are all pretty young, early to late 20s, and had the opportunity to check out a building before demolition. Unfortunately, we weren't allowed to have cell phones or take pictures of anything because of safety, and our only communication was with walkie-talkies to a team outside. We were decked out in our field gear, steel-toe boots, jeans, safety vest, gloves, safety glasses, and hard hats, to be exact. Anyways, we went up to the top floor to check out the building while our boss did some technical work with a safety manager. As they were working, we were given the okay to explore a little. My friend and I went down to floor with a group to be away from the bosses and began messing around. The building was huge and still had some things inside of it, like tubes, buildings, old chairs, etc. You can imagine the jousting that took place. Long story short, a coworker got a bloody nose. Being the only girls, we took him into the bathroom to clean it up before having to report blood to the boss man, literally upstairs. So in the bathroom, we shove his nose full of extra paper and washed it down, for the water hadn't been shut off yet. As we were cleaning him up, a knock came on the door, and a "this isn't funny" type line. I went to the door and began to open it when I noticed that it was jammed, and then I said, "This isn't funny." After a few tugs, I heard a panic in my coworker's voice on the other side of the door and started pounding. We were all yelling something as blood started seeping through the Brian's papers. Jane went to grab more when suddenly the bathroom stall doors all shut at the same time, bouncing off the doors, and they stop, and the freaking lights went out. Someone screamed, it may have been me, and I started clawing at the door, yelling to let us out. This bathroom had 0 windows in it, and I can't even tell you how fucking dark it was inside. We were scared, so scared, and Brian was cursing profusely. I heard a sudden rush of air, like in scary movies when the ghost is breathing, if you can imagine. It was like a freezing cold person was trying to exhale, and I felt a horrible sticky hand crawl up the back of my hard hat. I ripped it off, and Jane screamed from the sound of hitting the floor at her feet. Finally, a loud bang ripped the door open, and the others came rushing in, pale-faced. We were all yelling and screaming at each other. We all made it out safe, and I got my hard hat back from my boss checking out the bathroom. All I found was blood on the sink. I can still feel that hand on the back of my head if I sit here for a while, and I'm constantly wiping away at air. I assume now that the building in question was probably a retirement home, although in high school we treated it like it was an abandonment award, but referred to it as the old folks' home. It was one of our greatest desires to explore it, and we completely expected and secretly wished to have a terrifying experience. Everyone agreed that the place was haunted, although it isn't, and I don't believe in that stuff anyway. It had been abandoned for as long as any of us knew, just on the outskirts of our small town in Middle America. There were four of us that explored the grounds and later the interior in episodic increments, discovering more each time. The first time, we were brave enough to go. It was just before dark. The place was locked up tight. The second time, a door at the back of it had a glass window smashed out. This should have been our first clue to stay away. As it was the glass with the lines of wire through it, something hung the window with a little dry blood on it. One of us reached through and turned the handle from the inside and opened the door. With windows boarded up, no moonlight lit the hallways, and we only had one flashlight. We went down 2 hallways. All the rooms along the way were empty, except for 1 or 2 with a lone chair or bed frame. We discovered that there was a second floor in the basement, but we didn't get a chance to explore more as a red light attached to a car battery freaked one of us out. We thought it was an alarm or something. Anyway, we scoped it out for a few weeks and made sure there weren't any security patrols or anything weird like that. We never knew who owned it. Somebody had to own it. Nobody looked after it aside from mowing the lawn once a month. We returned, the third time, with intentions to map the place out. I wanted to go find some cool antique or something. We were all freaked out by the darkness and had the idea of ghost, but none of us considered the possibility of other people being in the building. In the basement, we finally found creepy signs of other visitors, but it wasn't until the last minute that feces started hit the fan. There was one room with a dirt floor and a Christmas tree planted in the middle of it. As in, it was decorated pine tree, tinsel beer cans, paper clowns. Beer cans and empty liquor bottles encircled the room, a ridiculous amount of them. The door to the room was like a cell door, metal bars and a broken lock. One of us waited at the door because he kept hearing someone, and he called to us with an update as we found a bunch of berry Christmas trees at the back of the room. "I think I hear someone," he whined, was his catchphrase. We had varying theories on the room. It was all new stuff as far as we could tell. Not as dusty as everything else in the building. All in all, it was more odd than creepy. The room at the end of the hall had lights hanging from the ceiling, smashed to pieces, glass covering the floor. A staircase at the back LED up, and to an area that we hadn't seen yet. There were chairs and desks clogging the way, splinters and nails pointing in every direction. Everything happened in a flash. There was a creak, then a door slamming shut. Down the hall, we scurried over to the desk and chairs to the ground floor. The door was locked there, so we continued to the second floor, which was unknown to us. We sprinted down the hall and doorway to our right. And then something caught our attention. Inside was a mattress. On the floor next to it was a giant tub of peanut butter and a pair of stained underwear. It depends on who you ask, but we took the room as a deafening alarm. Probably a homeless person lived there. It's nothing sinister. I stepped into the doorway to try and see more, and as soon as I saw the upside-down cross on the wall, I think it was upside down, but I could have been just fear. We heard wood snapping in the stairway. Not just someone coming up, the electric chairs being broken. We bolted down the hall and found another staircase to get back to the ground floor and exit the building. We made it a block away and stopped to catch our breath. Everything was still for a moment, and then a car pulled out from behind the abandoned building is bed toward us. We ran again and didn't stop until we were back at my friend's house. None of us have a clue about anything we saw there. We didn't know if we should be worried or anything. We just hadn't seen enough, really. We never went near it again, and a year later, it was demolished. As an intro, I go by the name Halt, and I'm an urban explorer living in Virginia. And I got into urban exploration, or herbex, just because I love the thrill of exploring places long since abandoned, but within that time, I have tended to come across some rather terrifying experiences. Depending on what kind of feedback I get, I'll see if you guys would like to hear any more. But for now, I'll just share this one experience. One of my first experiences with the weirder and creepier side of herbex was when I started back in 2014. About 2 counties over from where I live, there's a mental institution called Central State Hospital. Being on the older side of this county, remnants of the previous buildings from 1926 are still standing. From the historical documents and records that I uncovered while doing some research, Central State Hospital was built following the Civil War to aid in relief efforts for recently freed black slaves. But as time went on, the facility became one of its first in the South to offer mental hospitalization for black patients. The new building is now built right next to the old one. So after some digging, snooping, and spying, I finally worked up the gumption to break in and explore. Armed with a flashlight and a mounting curiosity in a pry bar, I pulled back one of the boarded-up windows and crawled in. Not knowing what to expect, I began to wander the dark and creepy hallways of the old hospital, checking each room for anything interesting. The facility is basically one large square with 4-story corners, most likely offices, 2-story corridors, and a now heavily wooded courtyard. Where I got him was the east front corner. I wandered most of the corridors until I found a stairwell leading downstairs. On the sublevel, it was a long corridor that held an autopsy room, more again furnish room. Now, after an hour or so of looking around, reading old documents, and noticing some suspicious drug paraphernalia, I decided to make my way out. Seeing how it was going on midnight, as I turned around to leave, I know that the street security light that you would see from the bottom of the stairs was now absent. To my absolute horror, a massive, black figure at about 8 feet tall stood up at the top of the stairwell. Now, being the 6'7" bruiser that I was, I did the most logical thing any man would do. I screamed like the bitch I was up the stairs and through the figure, out the pried open window and into the loving arms of Petersburg's finest. Slapped with a potential trespassing charge and sitting in the back of a police cruiser, I was questioned about the screaming. I told the officer what I had seen. He turned absolutely white as a sheet. Apparently, since him and his partner started doing grounds on this property, they had constantly seen apparitions all along the open windows at the top floors. Needless to say, I got off with a slap on the wrist in no more kind of deal. I live in Massachusetts. There is a location out here called the Belchertown State School for the feeble-minded. Check it out on Wikipedia and Google some pictures. It's pretty neat stuff. Well, it has a very dark history with ill treatment of patients, including children, and reported suicides. Closed in 1992, it was mostly demolished in late 2016 into 2017. But before that, I spent a year going there on a weekly basis, usually Fridays. I began with a few friends, and then over time, I would go there alone. I spent a lot of time on those grounds, to the point where I knew every part of it inside and out. I even became something of a local legend because I wore a mask when exploring, and if I ran into other groups, they would recognize me from the stories. There are a few selfies out there of meeting some folks too. People liked taking pictures. Never saw any of the selfies though, sadly. But there were many nights I had the whole grounds to myself. Paranormal activity was rampant, and I have some crazy stories. The most obvious, in Frinkard 1, was noises. Now mind you, the whole of the complex was in disrepair. Not only that, but wild animals would sometimes move in and out of the location, so there were a lot of unidentified noises I could likely attribute to animals. I'm a firm believer in the paranormal, but I try to approach all things as a skeptic before jumping to potential activity. A few things I couldn't explain. One was the X door. There was one door in the hospital. It was on the 3rd floor, right wing second door, into the floor on the left. It was beside, that once was a bathroom. This door, LED to a hall containing several empty rooms, and I could not determine what these rooms might have been. They didn't look like cells, more like office or storage spaces. This door was heavy. It took effort to move. I'm a pretty stocky 6-foot dude, and I had to lean into this door to get it to move. I call it the X door because it was the only door in the whole facility marked with a spray-painted orange X on the door. Imaginative, I know. This door was a highlight for my personal trips, as well as when I went with Grooves, because we would close the door, walk away, and later come back to find it open. It's possible some animal managed to open it, as unlikely as that is. What was more unlikely were the times we left it open, and when we came back, about 10 minutes later, and it was closed. I tried, when alone, to sit and watch the door, but nothing ever happened. I tried to replicate potential causes, but there was zero airflow in this wing due to heavy doors on all other sides. And honestly, if an animal did get in, it could not have been bigger than a rat, due to there being so little open space to move in this particular segment. I can never explain the X door, but it was always a good stun when I bring up a group back up to that floor and we'd find the door shifted. Another experience was one time I was bringing two of my friends out there. It was their first time to the grounds. We made it past the fence into the outside of the asylum. They didn't want to go in, getting spooked. I encouraged them to try it. Has some cool stuff to see, after all. And then we all three at the same time heard what sounded like screaming laughter and talking all the same time. I heard more laughter, but my friends say some screaming was more prominent. Now, could have been another group inside the hospital building, but here's the thing. I have been on the grounds when another group is talking or laughing, screaming inside, and you can't pinpoint exactly where it goes down. Lots of broken windows and open walls, so it's pretty damn easy to lock down at least what segment the group was from. But this sound came from the building. That's the only way I can explain. Like the whole building at once just let loose a stream of trapped sounds. I'm a gutsy bloke, but I got chills too, and we laughed to the begging of my friends to flee the grounds. Wish I could have stayed the night. The activity was just getting started, I feel. I would go there weekly and spend about a half hour in several key rooms: the padded cell, the silent room, the X room, the auditorium gym. A lot of great sounds and some truly disturbing sensations. I recently went with my mother to her job just to get the feel for the place and saw likely be working there soon. She's a groundskeeper at a university. Basically, the university buys up nearby homes to expand itself, and they bought up this elderly man's home after he died, a really big 2-bathroom, 3-bedroom, managing to fit on one floor in a basement. It's been stripped down to a few curtains and a piece of furniture or two. The groundskeepers basically use the home as a massive break room. I stayed there for about 7 hours a week or two ago, and I got freaked out. For starters, there's a big empty room with a small table and 2 chairs in one corner, and right in the middle is a small chandelier. Well, after about 30 minutes of getting settled in the home, I started to walk around, and that chandelier was slightly moving back and forth. I'm unsure of this elderly man or not, but there is nothing I can think of other than the elderly man that could have moved it. It was a freezing day out, so all the windows and doors are shut. There's a single fan in the house that I can recall, and it was not on. I specifically checked once, and I noticed the swinging. About an hour later, I get the courage to go down to the massive basement since I was bored. There are no lights down there, despite there being 3 massive rooms in total. Plus, a bathroom down there. Before I went in, I took a picture at the top of the stairs looking down. I don't know if my mind is fucking with me, but I swear to God there's a face at the bottom. My final evidence. What haunting goes without unexplained footsteps? After going down to the basement and barely going past the steps from running back up them again, I heard a distant, but loud set of footsteps. About 4 steps on hardwood with about a half second in between each step. They sounded like they were on the other side of the house. Keep in mind it's a very echo-prone house, due to there being nothing but wooden floors and big open spaces, so it may have been anywhere. So tomorrow, I'll be going back there again with the same amount of time. What should I do? Should I ask it anything? Should I leave it alone? I kind of want to interact with him a bit more, since those who knew him said he was a nice guy. In my town, there used to be an abandoned prison. It has since been knocked down. It was in the middle of the woods, and it wasn't the kind of place you'd end up accidentally. Every once in a while, police will patrol around it for the most part. It was just barbed wire fences doing their job. Now, this wasn't a high-security prison for serial killers or anything like that, but it held robbers and rapists in the Valafabams, like up until about 8 years prior to the incident. It was unsettling during the daytime, especially as so much of it had been left behind, as if the place was abandoned in a hurry. But it was downright creepy at night. Well, in high school, my friend Nick and I loved exploring. We went all over, including to the abandoned hospital that was only a couple of miles away from the jail. We were lucky, growing up in the area. We knew that there was a small hole under the fence, and one area which was the only way to access the jail. One night, we made the normal trip under this hole, and were talking and walking around the area outside of the jail. We were moving as quietly as we could, because as I said before, occasionally, police will patrol the area. They just parked their cars at the fence on the opposite side of the fence from where we entered, so we wouldn't be able to see them if they were there. Eventually, we were pretty sure that there were no police, so we began to be a little louder and turned on our flashlights. I should mention now, other than the occasional policeman who parks his car outside the fence, we had never seen another person anywhere near the jail, let alone inside of the fenced area. We were hesitant to the answer to jail itself. First of all, because of how scary it is at night, and second, because it's a pain in the ass to get into the jail itself during the daytime, let alone at night. So instead, we kind of just walked around the outside for a while, as we normally do, scaring ourselves for the fun of it. Anyway, eventually, we start to work up the courage to go inside the jail. So, we make it to the long trip to the other side of it, to where we know there was an entrance. We were walking along the side of the jail, where the cells were, which made these huge windows. These were so that, from the outside when the jail was in use, you could see all the inmates in what they were doing. As we're walking, out of nowhere, a light turns on from inside one of the cells that were only a few feet away from us. We can't really see anything inside, just the beam of flashlight, which first points upwards and then directly at us. At first, we just froze in terror. As I said before, we'd never seen anyone in there before. Who would be sitting inside of a cell, totally silent and in the darkness, as a couple of teenage boys walked around the outside. We couldn't imagine that it was a fellow thrill-seeker like us. It was not the kind of place you'd sit alone in the dark, a homeless person. No, we didn't think we'd have a flashlight anyway. And we assumed that costs must look through the inside during the day. A police officer probably not. There was no reason for him to be sitting inside of the building, waiting while we had known that we were there for a long time. After a few seconds, we sprinted away as fast as we could. I didn't even turn around to see if we were being followed or anything. We just found the hole under the fence and got the fuck out of there. So we wonder to this day, who is sitting inside the abandoned jail cell in the dark? Presumably, watching two teenage boys walk around inside, then waiting until we were only about a few feet away to announce his presence by turning on a flashlight. I'd assume we'll never know. The answer to that question, I don't really want to know. We never went back at night, and that place is gone now.